door slammed so hard the picture frames rattled on the wall. Not his door. Mine. I stood in the hallway of the house I had built with my own hands 41 years ago. The house where my son had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where my wife Elaine had planted her rose garden along the back fence before the cancer took her, and I listened to the sound of my son-in-law's footsteps disappear down the stairs. My cheek was still warm. Not from a slap, not exactly. He hadn't touched me, but the words hit harder than any hand ever could. "You're a burden," he had said. "You've always been a burden. And if you think Claire is going to keep choosing you over this family, you've got another thing coming." I was 64 years old. I had worked 37 years as a millwright at the paper mill in Kenora. I had raised my daughter alone after Elaine passed, working double shifts on Saturdays so Claire could finish her degree at Lakehead without a single student loan. I had never asked for anything back, not one thing. And now I was standing in my own hallway, in my own house, being told I was a burden. His name was Reginald. Everyone called him Reg. Claire had met him at a conference in Toronto 6 years ago, and she brought him home for Christmas that first year with this look on her face. That look daughters get when they've made up their minds and they just need you to agree with them. I agreed. He was confident, well-dressed. Shook my hand too firmly the way some men do when they're trying to establish something. He worked in commercial real estate. Did well for himself, or so he said. He talked a lot about what things were worth. I should have paid more attention to that. They got married in the summer. A small wedding at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Claire wore her mother's earrings. I walked her down the aisle and managed to keep it together until I sat down in the front pew, and then I didn't keep it together at all. Reg saw me crying, and I caught something flicker across his face. Not sympathy. Something else. Like he was filing it away. For the first 2 years, everything seemed fine. They lived in a condo in Mississauga. Claire was working as a physiotherapist and doing well. I stayed in Kenora. I'd call Claire on Sunday evenings and she'd sound happy enough, though the calls got shorter. More distracted. She started saying we in a way that felt rehearsed. We don't really do big holidays anymore. We've been trying to simplify. We think it's better if you visit less in winter. Like she'd been absorbed into something. Then Reg lost his biggest client. I found out from Claire 3 months after it happened, which told me everything about how things worked between them now. The client had been a developer behind a mixed-use project in Brampton, and when the deal collapsed, Reg's commission structure went with it. He had also, as it turned out, borrowed against projected earnings in a way that left them suddenly and significantly short. Claire called me crying on a Wednesday afternoon. I remembered because I was in the middle of replacing a section of fence out back, and I had to set the post digger down, and just stand there in the cold listening to her try to explain without really explaining. They needed help. Not a little help. The kind of help that involved numbers with more than 4 digits. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. What I didn't know, what I only understood later, was that Reg had framed the whole conversation. He had coached her on what to say and what not to say. He had calculated exactly how much to ask for, and from whom, and in what order. And somewhere in that calculation, he had also calculated me. I lent them $40,000, transferred from the savings account I had been adding to since I was 26 years old. I told Claire there was no rush, no interest, pay me back when you can. Reg sent me a text message that said, "Appreciate it, Frank." That was it, one text. Frank, not Dad. Not even a phone call. 6 months later, they asked if they could move in. Temporarily. Just while they got back on their feet, I said yes to that too. I don't know when temporarily ended. I don't think there was a clear moment. It was more like a slow tide coming in, so gradual you don't notice until the water's up to your chin. Reg started making small comments about the house. The layout was inefficient. The kitchen needed updating. The neighborhood was fine, in a tone that made clear he thought it wasn't. He started having his work calls at the kitchen table at 7 in the morning, which meant I had to take my coffee in the living room like a guest. He rearranged the garage without asking. He replaced my coffee maker with one of those pod machines because, he said, his old one was better quality. He threw out my old one. Claire noticed some of it, I think. But she had her own exhaustion, her own adjustments. She was commuting 40 minutes each way to her clinic, and Raid's recovery had stalled, and their daughter, my granddaughter Ivy, 4 years old and the best thing in the world, needed drop-offs and pickups and all the ordinary logistics that grind people down. Claire didn't have the energy to police her husband's behavior toward her father. I understood that. I did. But I also understood that understanding it didn't make it stop. The worst of it started in the fall. October, maybe the second week. Reg had a business contact coming from Calgary, some developer he was trying to bring into a new project, and he decided to host a dinner at the house. At my house. He ordered the food, bought the wine, rearranged the dining room. He asked me, 48 hours before the dinner, if I could make myself scarce that evening. I asked him what he meant. "You know," he said, "stay upstairs or go out. I don't want it to be weird." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the $40,000. I thought about his pod coffee maker sitting in my kitchen. I thought about Ivy upstairs taking her afternoon nap. "It's my house, Reg," I said. He smiled. The smile never reached his eyes. "Of course it is, Frank. I just want the evening to go smoothly. You know how you can be sometimes." I didn't ask him how I could be sometimes. I went upstairs and sat in my bedroom and listened to the sound of my house filling up with his things and his people. The dinner came and went. I ate a sandwich in my room. I heard laughter from downstairs. I heard Reg's voice doing the thing it did when he was performing. Louder, rounder, the accent slightly flattened like he was trying to sound more like somewhere else. I heard Ivy start crying around 8 and then get quieter, so someone had dealt with it. Probably Claire. It was the sandwich that did it. Not as a dramatic moment. I wasn't sitting there having a revelation. It was quieter than that. I just sat on the edge of my bed eating a ham sandwich in the house where I had lived for 41 years, and I thought, this has to stop. Not in anger, almost with a kind of sadness for what I was going to have to do. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do. But I knew it was going to take patience. I had always been patient. 37 years running heavy machinery teaches you that. You don't force a seized component. You work around it. You wait for the right moment, and then you apply exactly the right amount of pressure. I called my friend Howard the next morning. Howard had been my closest friend since the mill. He'd retired a year before I had, and spent most of his time now fishing and renovating a cabin near Dryden. He'd also spent 2 years on the board of a local credit union, and he knew enough about money and property to ask the right questions. I told him everything over the phone. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. "You transferred $40,000 to them directly," he said. "Into their joint account, yes. And there's nothing in writing. There's a text message from Reg." Howard was quiet again. "Frank," he said, "you need to talk to someone. Properly. Not me, a lawyer." I had been thinking the same thing, but hearing someone else say it made it real. That afternoon I called a firm in Kenora. I'd dealt with them years before when I was sorting out Elaine's estate, and I made an appointment. Her name was Constance. She was 60, maybe 62. With reading glasses she kept taking off and cleaning and putting back on. She listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me a few questions, made some notes, and then she leaned back in her chair. "The loan is recoverable," she said, "especially with the text. Informal, but it's acknowledgement of the debt. That's something." She also told me some things about property and cohabitation that I hadn't known, and some things about what could happen if I wasn't careful about how things were structured going forward. She wasn't alarmist about it. She was just precise. I appreciated that. I went home, and I started paying attention in a different way. Not suspicious, exactly. I'd already been suspicious. But systematic. I started keeping a small notebook in my jacket pocket. Dates, amounts, conversations. Things Reg said about the house. Comments he made about my finances. Questions he had asked casually about my pension and what I had in RSPs. I wrote it all down. And then in November, Reg came to me with a proposal. He sat down at the kitchen table across from me one evening when Claire was at work and Ivy was asleep. He had a folder, an actual folder, the kind you get at Staples with a little window on the front. I remember thinking that was strange, that he had prepared a folder for a conversation with me. He said he had been doing some thinking. He said that the current arrangement wasn't sustainable, that they needed more stability, and that he had come up with a solution that would be good for everyone. He opened the folder. Inside was a document, several pages, printed and clipped. He wanted me to sign the house over to him and Claire. A transfer of title. He had had it drawn up by someone, a contact, he said, not a lawyer exactly. Someone in property transactions. In exchange, he said, they would assume responsibility for the property taxes and maintenance, and I would have the right to live there for my lifetime. I looked at the document. I looked at him. A life interest, I said. Exactly, he said. You stay as long as you want. Nothing changes. But on paper, it makes more sense this way. Better for everyone tax-wise. I knew it wasn't better for everyone tax-wise. I knew because I had just spent an hour with Constance learning exactly what this kind of arrangement meant and what it didn't mean. A life interest is not the same as ownership. A life interest can be complicated. A life interest in the wrong circumstances can be ended. Let me think about it, I said. His expression flickered. He had expected a different answer. Of course, he said, take your time. And then, almost as an afterthought, it would also help us consolidate the loan situation, clean things up. There it was. The $40,000 folded into the transaction like a line item. I called Constance the next morning. She was not surprised. She told me not to sign anything. She also told me that she knew someone, a retired RCMP financial crimes officer who now did consulting work, and that some of what I was describing was worth a second set of eyes. His name was Edmund. He was 67, built like someone who had spent 30 years not taking nonsense, and he had a handshake that meant it. He came to Kenora the following week, and I showed him the folder, the document, the notebook. He read everything carefully. He asked me about Reg's business history, the collapsed deal in Brampton, the original loan. Then he told me that Reg had done this before. Not exactly this, not with a father-in-law, but the shape of it, the manufactured financial dependency, the slow consolidation of assets, the property transfer request. He had seen this pattern. Usually it targeted people who were alone, who trusted someone close to them, who didn't ask questions because asking felt like an accusation. He counted on you being a decent man, Edmund said. He wasn't wrong, I said. No, said Edmund, but being decent doesn't mean being a pushover. I went home and I thought about Ivy. She was 4. She didn't understand any of this. She just knew that she liked to sit with me in the morning while I had my coffee, and that I always had the right crackers, and that I would read her the same story 3 times in a row without complaining. I thought about what it would mean for her if this all went sideways. I didn't want her caught in the middle of something ugly. I didn't want Claire destroyed either, even if Claire had let herself be pulled away from me further than I'd ever wanted. So I decided I was not going to fight, not directly. I was going to invite. I called Reg, and I told him I had thought about his proposal, and that I wanted to discuss it further. I told him I thought it was worth having a proper conversation. With Claire, with his contact who had drawn up the document, and perhaps with a few other people as well. I suggested dinner. A real dinner, I said. I would cook. He agreed immediately. He was pleased. I could hear it. I called Constance. I called Edmund. I called Claire. That last call was the hardest. Claire picked up on the second ring the way she always did when she saw it was me, because she still had that reflex from all the years when a call from me meant something worth answering. I told her I needed to speak to her honestly. I told her I loved her, and then I told her everything: the notebook, the folder, what Constance had said, what Edmund had found. She was silent for a very long time. He said you were getting confused, she finally said. Her voice was small, that you weren't understanding things properly anymore. I know he did, I said. Another silence. Dad, she said. And then she didn't say anything else for almost a full minute. But I could hear her breathing. I could hear her trying to figure out what was true and what she had been told was true and whether those were the same thing. Will you come to dinner? I said. Yes, she said. The dinner was a Thursday. I made a proper roast, the kind Elaine used to make on Sundays, with roasted potatoes and glazed carrots and a mushroom gravy that took the better part of an afternoon. I set the table properly. The good tablecloth, the Elaine's dishes, the ones I kept in the cabinet and almost never used. Ivy helped me fold the napkins very seriously, and I let her put one in her own lap and pretend to be very formal about it. Reg arrived home from work and stopped in the doorway of the dining room. He took in the table, the dishes, Ivy sitting up straight with her folded napkin. His expression was careful. What's the occasion? He said. Just dinner, I said. Go wash up. Constance arrived at 6:45. Edmund arrived at 6:50. Claire, who had been upstairs with Ivy, came downstairs and stopped at the bottom of the steps when she saw them in the hallway. She looked at me. I nodded very slightly. Reg came out of the bathroom and saw them, and his face did something complicated. He looked at Claire. Claire looked at the floor. Reg, I said, come sit down, I made a roast. He sat. Everyone sat. I served the food. I poured water. Ivy chatted about something that had happened at her daycare involving a hamster, and for a few minutes the table had the warmth of an ordinary family dinner, which felt strange and also important. Then Constance set a folder on the table. Not a Staples folder. A proper legal folder, with her firm's name embossed on the front. I'll keep this simple, she said. The document you prepared regarding the title transfer is not legally sound, and we have documentation suggesting the circumstances under which it was presented constitute undue influence. We're also in contact with the relevant provincial ministry regarding some inconsistencies in how the original $40,000 transfer was characterized in your 2024 filing. Reg was very still. His fork was in his hand, and he set it down very carefully. Additionally, Edmund said, from across the table, I've been in touch with a former colleague who handles financial elder abuse cases for the OPP. Reg looked at Claire. Claire was looking at her plate. I want you out of my house, I said. I want it done properly and legally and without any more of this. Constance will handle the details. You'll be given 60 days. This is insane, Reg said. Claire. Don't, Claire said. Very quietly, still looking at her plate. Then she looked up. I've already spoken to a family lawyer. Ivy stays with me. We'll sort out the rest. Reg left that night. He didn't take much. He stood in the hallway with a bag over his shoulder, and he looked at me with an expression that wanted to be contempt but landed somewhere closer to embarrassment, and then he walked out the front door. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 2 years. Ivy came and found me in the kitchen where I was washing up. She climbed onto the step stool she used to reach the counter and stood beside me and picked up a dish towel. Are you sad, Grandpa? She said. I thought about it honestly. A little, I said, but mostly I'm okay. She dried a glass very carefully, both hands, the way I had shown her. Okay is good, she said. It is, I thought. Okay is good. The $40,000 was repaid over the following 14 months, structured through the legal agreement Constance drew up. Reg contested none of it. Whatever Edmund had found, and I didn't ask for all the details, I didn't want them. It was enough. Claire filed for divorce that winter. It was hard on her. It was hard on all of us. But she started coming back to herself in ways I hadn't seen in years. She laughed on the phone again. She started saying I instead of we. Ivy turned 5 in February. I made her a birthday cake shaped like a hamster, badly with too much pink icing. She loved it so much she cried. The good kind of crying. I still sit at the head of my own table. I earned that chair, and I have no intention of giving it up. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to figure out what I actually learned from it, not the legal part. Constance handled that. Not the financial part. Edmund made sure of it. What I'm still turning over is the quieter thing underneath all of it. Reg counted on something real about me. He counted on the fact that I had raised my daughter to believe in generosity, and so I would be generous. He counted on the fact that I had worked hard my whole life without making a fuss about it, and so I wouldn't make a fuss now. He looked at a decent man and saw an opening, and for a while he was right. What I've come to understand is that decency without discernment isn't a virtue, it's a vulnerability. I gave $40,000 without a signed agreement because asking for one felt like an accusation, and I didn't want to be that kind of father-in-law. I let him rearrange my garage and replace my coffee maker and eat dinner at my table while I ate a sandwich upstairs, because confronting it felt beneath me. I told myself I was being the bigger person. What I was actually doing was letting someone else decide who I was allowed to be in my own home. The shift happened when I started paying attention differently, not with anger, would have made me sloppy, but with clarity. I got out that little notebook and I wrote things down, and I called Howard, and I sat across from Constance, and I let myself be helped. That last part was harder than people think. Asking for help, when you've spent 40 years being the one who provides it, doesn't come naturally. But it was the right thing. Intelligence isn't just knowing what you know. It's knowing when to find someone who knows more. And then the patience. Lord, the patience. I sat across from Reg at that table, and I served him a roast, and I let him believe he had won. Right up until the moment he understood he hadn't. Every instinct I had wanted to say something sooner. Every instinct said, stand up, say your piece, make him understand who he was dealing with. But timing matters. I learned that at the mill. You don't force a seized component. You wait for the right moment, and you apply exactly the right pressure. That's not weakness. That's how you actually win. What I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something in this story, whether it's your own home, your own savings, your own version of a sandwich eaten alone upstairs, is this: the life you built has worth. Not just in dollars or square footage, but in what it represents. The years, the sacrifices. The people you held up. That doesn't become worthless because someone clever decided to treat it that way. Claire is finding her way back. Ivy turned 6 this spring. I'm still in my house, still at the head of my table. What Reg took from me was 2 years of peace of mind and $40,000. What he couldn't take was the thing that let me get it back. Knowing who I was, thinking clearly when it mattered, and holding on long enough to see it through. That's the only inheritance worth passing on.